Salon number 13. This is the first one and the last one of this year. Typically we do 2 or 3 salons a year, but this was a thing for everybody, a challenging year. So we just we were dedicated to do one at least, and it was part of a Business of Design Week, which has been cancelled last week, but still we're here, and I think it's quite meaningful to have you and our speakers with us today. So I want to talk about the meaning of the brand master planning and power of narrative first, just to introduce the topic. So last year I did a talk at the Business of Design Week talking about brand master planning and kind of introducing this concept that we've been working on as Marc and Chantal, maybe for the past 20 years or so, and kind of coining that word that encompasses everything that we do, from strategy to building brands and delivering them in many different ways. And this is the second chapter, if you want, and opening up on another topic within brand master planning, which is the power of narrative. And we really work, and we've been working specifically in the past few years, really, at the brand that we create. How do we make them live in a real world, in a sustainable way? How do we bring people into those brands? So, with a story that we tell, and how do we tell them? So this is why I think today I wanted to bring those three person here, 3 speakers that I know. I know them for a long time, and they're friends, and so it's meaningful to have them here. But also they have so much experience in very different ways, in not only creating but really delivering a narrative around and a story around the brand they are working with. So let me introduce them. So we have Arnaud Cansier, which normally need no introduction in Hong Kong, but still I will do it. Arnaud is a founder of Kapok. How would you describe it? Lifestyle?
Lifestyle select shop.
Select shop, exactly. But not only that, is also creating different brands within that you carry within your store, but also have a life of their own. So I think you will elaborate on that. Yeah. So it's coming very much from the fashion background and a lifestyle background, creating bespoke, very specific brands that connect with people on a large scale, but also in a very precise and very bespoke way. Next, we have our friends coming from London, Ben Masterton Smith, and I had the privilege of knowing Ben and working with Ben on a very, very unique project, which we did. We launched last year. It's been a year. We opened last year, in May last year, for my birthday, actually. Ben is an interior designer, architect, based in London, and he created with us the interior design for the Rise Hotel in Seoul, with part of the autograph collection, the Marriott autograph collection. It's a very unique project in a Hongdae district in Seoul that is, I would compare maybe to a Shoreditch in London or Brooklyn, but Brooklyn is something else now, isn't it? But a very up-and-coming, very vibrant district, and we created a brand, and we asked Ben and his team to come and do the interior design, even though they're not on Marriott approved list of suppliers, and but I think they did an incredible job, and Ben will talk about our experience and also the other project is working in London and across Europe and in different countries. And then we have my friend Matthew Jung, who's had a long career both in hospitality with Starwood W Hotel Group, and then, and I think you'll talk about that, move into your your first career, basically back into your first career, like as an athlete moving to with Nike for how long now? It's been 10 years. 10 years with Nike, and was now vice president and a general manager for Converse, which belonged to the Nike group. And Matthew and his team has been working on connecting the Converse story to Asia and Chinese audience, and I think he'll talk about that. So, I'll do a quick introduction of a topic again. So, because it can be quite specific. What is a brand narrative versus a brand story? So it's been something we've been working on specifically this year and last 2 years. It's defining what is the difference between brand story and brand narrative. And we're talking an example here that will follow. It's very much the idea that a brand story is a finite story that kind of defines the beginning, like an origin story, basically, the origin of a brand. So how did the brand came to life? How was it founded? And that's just what we call a brand story. And then the brand narrative is more open-ended story that kind of unfold indefinitely, and that is much more about how the people who receive the story appropriate themselves on more the emotional level and connect with the metaphors and the creative interpretation that are embedded constantly into the brand. And just to illustrate that, we took an example of a story that, I mean, most of us know these days, and it's the Iron Man story, right? So if we consider Iron Man as a brand, it's got an origin story, like any superhero, which we call basically the brand story. And the origin story is, I think you've all seen most of you have seen the movie probably. So it's, Tony Stark get kidnapped by terrorists. He built a special suit, and then he escaped, right? And that's how the story starts. That's the origin story. Right. So that's what we call, in a single loop, basically, the brand story. And it's very plot-driven. And there's a character into it, but it's very about the plot and the mechanic of it in the first movie. And then the narrative, which is what we're talking about today, is unfolding, in that case, with the Marvel Comics for 10 years, from the first Iron Man to Endgame. It's a 10 years arc, basically, that is much more character-driven. It's much more about the emotion and how do we connect with this character, and what in the story do we see that really reflect our own preoccupation. And for example, in the case of Iron Man and Tony Stark, is this continuous improvement through the suit and the Iron Man suit. So I think by the end of Endgame, apparently his suit is the number 85. So it's been 85 iteration for him to get to that, that ultimate movie. But also it's a process of transformation as a character. So we start in the first movie as Tony Stark was kind of genius, playboy billionaire, and then he becomes this very arrogant, sarcastic superhero. And then we see him in the last movie as changing into a more responsible person, basically. So that's the difference between a brand story and a brand narrative, basically. The narrative is this constant iteration of a character, and the brand becomes a character. So I want now to start prompting our panel, and I want to make this discussion not so technical. Like I think every salon we try to deliver some giveaways and something that is actionable for you. But I think anybody can go online and Google what is a brand narrative today. But I think here we have an occasion to have a more personal discussion of what drives us as creative people every day to come out and just put our energy into what we do, basically. So I'll start with maybe Arnaud, since you're looking at me. So, so how does the narrative, help you in the creative process?
I think it's really at the center for me of the entire creative process. So, and it's always been very, very important for me. So I grew up in countryside, south of France. You know, it's very beautiful. But when I was a kid, super, super boring. So I was in school, and they have this little library, so we can borrow books, you know. And so Saturday I borrowed a book, and I was scolded by the teacher because I was reading too fast and too many books, and I mean you cannot enjoy because you're reading too fast. But I was very hungry for this, and later I study business, but I also study literature. It's so always I thought it's very important. And now I'm a retailer. I'm working with really hundreds of brands, and then I think I can tell which brands are working or not, you know, and I can tell that the brand that have a strong narrative, they're the one that really work well, and people can connect to it. First, because when we work with a lot of people that are brand owner, sometimes they come from a very product background, and they always have the same belief. I work so hard on my product, and it's better than the other guy's product, and people will know it, will feel it, and they will buy more of my stuff. And they very, very, very that's their narrative, you know, but it's so wrong because it never works like that. And their brand that I'm sure the product is actually superior, but they don't have this narrative, and it just fails. And a narrative is good at many levels. First, let's say you're in retail, or then it gives a way for my salesperson to talk to someone by connecting. And then if the narrative is, we'll talk later, well made, people will be able to connect in different way, remember. And if I think we all need stories, because sometimes our life is very dark and sucks, and then we have this story and these dreams. So I think people can fall in love with a brand if they are falling in love with the story and the narrative.
And do you see an evolution compared to a few years ago or a decade ago, where stories are even more important today, or they have to connect in a different way, or people are more, consumers are more concerned with stories? Because, you're in the thick of it.
No, I think that the brands...
In a very competitive environment.
I think the brands notice that the brands that have a narrative work well, so they become obsessed. And sometimes it's very tough, because sometimes they don't have a narrative, or maybe there is there, but they don't see it, so they are struggling. And sometimes they're trying to they know, I have to have a narrative, and they kind of put a narrative, but then it doesn't work, you know, it doesn't connect. So I think the customer, they don't notice, you know. Maybe they notice sometimes because everyone, story, narrative, listen to me, you know, I have something to tell you. I was made by something, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes they have enough, you know. It's too many, and they are too fake.
Yeah, we'll get back to that later. There's a few slides here. You want to talk to us about?
Yeah. So before I start Kapok, I was lucky to work with brands that very, very early are built on narrative. And so the first one is Lomography. So it was 2001. So I opened the office in Asia for this brand that was very, very tiny. So it started by Austrian guy. We found this Russian camera on a market in St. Petersburg and start taking picture. And it's a very, very, very bad camera. It makes, if you are technical, it makes really horrible photo. There's a lot of light leakage. It's unpredictable. It's blurry. And they had this kind of genius idea of let's celebrate how bad it is, you know. Let's celebrate how like unpredictable it is. Let's not try to make perfect photo, because perfect photo, you lose this kind of feeling, you know. And they create, and they didn't tell that story. They just create all these rules about lomography, and they create a community. They tell people, oh, photo is not just for making, it's for sharing. So they had this thing called Lomo Home that is a kind of ancestor of Instagram. And they were like really a good match with their narrative. You know?
You, in a space of 1 minute, you just went from a brand story to a brand narrative, basically.
Okay. So
yes. No, it's fantastic. And it's from the origin story to the how people connect with it.
And they always connect with, because very young people all the time that were born in a digital age, and for them it was like
going back to
like
analog.
They had also this kind of nostalgia, but they were very, very strong, and they were selling a product that is very difficult to sell, like selling analog bad camera in the time when digital camera was doing like that. But their narrative was so strong that people love what they were doing. And then I moved to the next one, even a bigger success. So same, I start working, so my company started working with Moleskine when they were really, really tiny. They had only 10 people in Italy, and they were started by two Italian. One, Fabio, was a business guy, and Maria, who created the brand, she's actually a teacher. She's not a marketing person. She's a teacher of literature in Italy, in university. And the guy was saying, oh, we have all these people, creative, traveling, nomad, we need to have products for them. And he proposed many things, and Maria was like, that's boring, that's annoying. And they were on holiday, and she read a book, and Bruce Chatwin book, and it talks about, oh, I went back to this small bookstore, and I cannot find this Moleskine notebook anymore that I love for my travel, and the company went bust. And she found the name there, and then she found the narrative there from the beginning. So, and she came with a tagline, the notebook of Matisse, Hemingway, Picasso, and that was quite genius, because before that, people didn't care about notebook. You know, they were stealing notebooks in their company cupboard. You know, I was doing this too. And then suddenly the notebook becomes a way to communicate, you know, because it became like a fashion. You know, when you meet someone the first time you don't know, you kind of like, okay, he dressed like that, I kind of know what it is. And it was kind of a secret signal, like people get their Moleskine notebook on the table, and it's like, oh, you and me, we are not boring, we are creative. Even they work in the bank, you know, they're like, and it was really interesting. But then they were very, they had this very strong pillar for the brand, and
it's too benign product, like Lomo and that, in a way that just
products that are not supposed to work.
That are not supposed to work.
And they really make it work
rather
just
than
because
trying
of the
to
narrative.
come up with an amazing product, just come up with a...
Well, they're not... I mean, they're not bad products, but it's based on something else, their success. And then...
a sense of community.
So, and now it was kind of narrative school, and now I've been working on brands that I'm more active in the making, you know. Yeah. Okay. So that's last, and then I will stop talking. I think I talked too much already. So that's a brand I started working with. It's a French brand called Béton Ciré. So, and it's the kind of hat and headwear, it's saturated, and a lot of different brands. And the origin story is the French founder found this hat on a market in a harbor in Brittany. So it's actually the hat very typical of the people sailing, the fishermen, you know, because they need to protect from the heat, but because of the wind, it cannot have the rim, otherwise it flies away. That's why it's rimless, and it's a similar hat for the Docker hat, and a lot of hats that have a history of very utility and worker. And the name Béton ciré is the narrative, because béton in French is concrete, and it's the word of streetwear, it's a word of very urban, and ciré is, when you go fishing, it's a kind of raincoat you have. Yeah. So it's, from the beginning, bringing the utilitarian and natural world together with the city world. And the work, so I start working with her, and I think the narrative, what is very interesting is when you work with creative people, they're like, oh, they're creative, so they go everywhere. Like, I want to do that, I want to do this. And my job was to be very annoying and say, no, you cannot do that. This is not part of the narrative. And we have, because I learned before that the brand I were working with that were successful, they were very, very, very laser focused, you know. And then I keep on telling her, it's already very rich, this universe. You can do a lot, but don't go out and stay there. You know, otherwise the customer, they will not understand. You tell a story and your product do something else.
Matthew is nodding here. Okay, we'll get to you.
So that's, and I work with other brands now, and sometimes I have trouble to find the narrative, and sometimes it's a sign that maybe the project I'm working with is not good. And sometimes I decide to stop rather than try to force, because I think if you force a narrative, it's a signal already you doing something wrong.
Yeah, I will get back to that. Yeah. Okay, Ben, transit. So I mean, same question to you, Ben, but in a complete different space. In the sense that, I mean, ARNAULT is really about, you know, creating brands and bringing products to people. But I mean, you work. You can describe a little bit what you've been doing, and when we worked together, you were with another company, but and now you have your own company. But so it's interesting as an architect and interior designer, how do you bring the notion of narrative into your creative process, and how do you think people react to it? And in the case of the hotel, of course, hospitality, that we do, narrative becomes so important because it is such a part of the experience and how people connect to it. But you apply that also. I mean, you're doing some amazing villas in Sicily, for example. I can't wait for them to be finished. Yes, it's slow, right, Sicily. Yeah. So yeah, I'll let you to talk to us about that.
Well, I think that I mean, maybe the narrative for us, I think, is often a starting point and a very useful way of establishing a mindset that then kind of guides you through the project. But I think your point earlier about an iterative process is really important, because I think that's exactly what design is. You know, you very rarely start off and say, okay, these initial thoughts, this exactly meets your brief, goodbye, we'll go and draw it. You know, it's this iterative conversation that goes on throughout the whole duration of a project. But I think it was very interesting sort of working with you on Rise, because I think the initial work which we had from you about this rawness and roughness as a sort of brief was something which I think we had to go away and think about for a long time, because in a very short period of time, because I think the question was, how do you create something really rough and raw, but not industrial
and premium still
in a premium luxurious
for a
way.
luxury brand? Yeah.
And I think that was really hard. So, you know, in a way, the top images across the page are sort of where that started off from.
This is the first image we received from when we came up with a Rise concept, and the first set of image we received from Ben and his team in London was that one. We're like, yes, we got it. And this is the final result. It's just really amazing, but just elevate the idea of the neighborhood that Matthew knows very well as well.
But I think the sort of rawness and roughness, this textural quality, but having a sense of polish about it, this idea of even using marble, which you can only just see in the bottom corner underneath where the concrete is cut and then you find marble inside. was this kind of idea of almost hiding luxury, but sort of creating this sense of polish about it, but in quite a surprising way. So I think initially when we presented that work, I think everyone was sort of pleased but quite surprised at what it was, because I think they'd been expecting something else. So I think that conversation is really important, and I think, as you said in your initial explanation, it's an evolving thing. It's not a fixed thing, and I think that has to continue in the life of a brand, but also in the life of creating a project or indeed a product.
Yeah, and I mean, in the case of hotel, I mean, this is a location, and there could be iteration in different cities, and it will be different according to the context as well. This was, I mean, most of the projects we do tend to be very contextual, actually, and conceptual and contextual. That goes back to the idea that it's hard to create a story, or we don't want to create a story out of nothing. There's got to be a truth to it from the beginning. And I mean, I want to point out the glossy pink floor, which took probably a year and a half to prototype, and it was when we saw it on the rendering, say, oh yeah, that'd be amazing, but that would never happen. And then, thanks to the owner also, that's very dedicated to put the effort into really going full throttle on delivering the initial idea, basically.
Completely. I can remember coming to a presentation meeting and finding that he'd moved out of his corner office, and they poured a whole sort of pink resin sample in
the
his
CEO
corner
office.
because he really wanted it to work.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe those are more recent work that in London that.
Yeah, so
really
I mean, I'll just talk briefly about this project. This was in the Royal Academy of Arts in Piccadilly in London, and they just had a massive David Chipperfield extension and refurbishment, and then suddenly thought, actually, our cafe looks a bit tatty. We need somebody to sort it out. So we had kind of 4 months from start to finish to completely transform this and also do the cafe in the courtyard. And the inspiration for this and the sort of story behind it was about what they were trying to do with the project, which was unify these two buildings, which are very awkward to unify architecturally, which was what David Chipperfield had been doing, but also expose the inner workings of the Royal Academy, which is also an art school, a place of the production of art, and a school for learning. So this 80s painting in the background, which sort of fills the entire wall very joyfully, with all these bright colours by Leonard Rosserman, actually captured all of that. It had the window out to the courtyard, which was something that we were trying to create a link between the language of these two spaces.
So this is heritage.
So the back
19th
panel completely is a sort of 80s mural.
Right.
And it's all about sort of the life of the Royal Academy, but it told the story very well. And then each of the two white arches, you can just see sort of blurrily in the background, is the School of Art, which was kind of hidden underneath it. So the idea was to kind of take our inspiration from that. So really all of the colours across this were about creating a much lighter and brighter space within the confines of a very strict heritage environment, but with a fun and a liveliness that accounted for its sort of all-day
kind of
cafe
decoding and recoding.
And then outside is the outdoor furniture that we made. And the top is actually a sort of completely custom spatter-painted enamel top, which, we sort of wanted to suggest this idea of the art school and the remnants of making art, but in a really punchy way, in a place that we couldn't really put lots of furniture in, so we wanted to make as much impact as possible.
Well, I love this project. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you'll get to see it for real next year.
Yes, very soon. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think in a way completely at the other end of the spectrum, because this was a sort of a real vision by someone who had run an arts venue in Shoreditch for sort of the last 15, 20 years, and came across this extraordinary abandoned space, which, since it showed Scarface in, I think, the early 90s, whenever.
Scarface. 80s? 80s, yeah.
Had basically just been mothballed, and then they kind of cut the cinema out.
Movie theater, right?
Yeah. And it was an Art Deco single screen cinema, so it had a massive capacity. and they
Really?
transformed the kind of ground floor into a terrible banqueting room.
Yeah.
And then this will sort of bring it back to life. But on a very limited budget, it was about retaining the character of it. And then underneath the rake of that seating, you can see sort of the angle on the right-hand side. There were lots of technical acoustic things that they had to do to separate acoustically those two spaces, but was creating a very different mood and atmosphere for a sort of all-day lounge and bar, kitchen.
Which is connected to the venue that is dedicated now not only to movies but really to live performance, right?
Yeah, mainly to
Yeah.
live performance.
Music,
and because it's such a relatively small venue,
Yeah.
it's a really intimate space for concerts.
But
as
the
you see.
program is amazing. I think every artist showing up in that space is somebody that should be on your playlist, basically. And they're all young, upcoming London artists, which are just
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah. All right. So I think now we're going to move to Matthew Jean. Who's going to talk to us about his journey into the Nike universe, the iterations. And, your latest iteration with Converse, and how interesting it is to. What I think. Well, there's so many things you can talk about, but such a iconic brand, and you bringing to China and Asia, and how do you? It's got so much heritage. How do you to recreate a narrative for a generation, a young generation, would maybe seen it on movies and things like that, but doesn't have this, family almost, from generation to generation. So you have to it's like a new spontaneous generation of people who have an attachment to an idea, really. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. You're catching me in the middle of kind of a linear journey through the rebuild of a brand. So I'm going to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing with it and how we're kind of reviving it in China and Korea. We handle China and Korea right now. And so I came into Converse about 3 years ago, and it was vastly underperforming in the region. It was invisible. Most consumers in mainland China had no relationship or emotional connection to the brand whatsoever. And so for me, this was the first time I'd ever done anything like this, not only as the marketing person, but then as the GM who came from marketing. And if you know what those, like the perception of that GM is, it's like, wait, hold on, man. You're a general manager who only knows the L in P&L, right? Like you only know how to spend money. So I don't know how to, I didn't really know how to approach things though, other than how I'd ever always approached things, which is through the lens of a longer term narrative, because that's how I had built kind of my resume. I opened the W Hotel in Hong Kong 10 years ago, and it was about trying to introduce this brand, this new brand to the region for the first time through lots and lots of storytelling. And then moving into Nike, it was to rebuild, to introduce the Chinese consumer to the sport of running. Because kids in China didn't run 10 years ago. And it was like, how do you get, like, running sucks anyway, but like, for people who didn't really know how to do it, it really sucks. And it was almost an impossible task. So, like, when sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, because I remember vividly I think one of the first events you did with Marisol, who was not here, in Beijing and Shanghai, when you introduced the Nike Fit
Flynet,
the net, and you did that amazing collaboration installation, and then that was probably 10.
That was in 2012.
Right
at the
and
Olympics.
when I look now, and when we look now at the Nike Run, just talking about running and then all the other stuff, but the phenomenon that it is in Shanghai, in China, is just, you're talking about tens of thousands of people who get together and go running in night and as a community again. And that happened in what, 5-6 years?
Oh, we did it. I mean, we catalyzed. We started working on it in like 2000, and right when we got there, about 2011, 2012, and it was really like. But the thing I love about it most was the creative process around like, okay, let's map this out over 5 or 6 years and figure out where we want to take this thing. And that's really what we literally created, a year-by-year narrative of like, and it was all purposeful. It was like the first year it was about changing the perception.
So it's like the Avengers, basically.
It was literally it was a 5-chapter story, and it was like and it's still going.
Yeah.
But the first chapter was change the perception of running, because kids just hated it. They didn't know what it was. It was a punishment in their school career. Like it was like if you did something bad, go run, and that literally all they had. And so for us, it was like, okay, we have to do that. Then we had to tackle this notion of like, I'm scared of getting hurt. So how to protect them, and then there was some innovation and stuff like that in there, which we could introduce them to, and tools. And then over the course of time, it was, okay, now you're running. And we started seeing them running, and it was pretty cool. And it was like, okay, so hey, run faster. And so over the course of time, we've actually been able to curate this narrative.
And you had this
and as it and watched it grow, and it was really cool. So that was like that, and so that was a marketing role.
So you've done that.
And that was a marketing job, and this was like build a business, and I didn't even know how to do that. So, but I do know that there's value, because we doubled the business at Nike Running in the 5 years that we introduced this strategy. So I was like, let's just try it again. And so I don't know if everybody knows that this is the logo of Converse. It's the star chevron, and the star, it was inspired by the idea of spark progress. The star is spark, and the chevron being progress, and it was introduced in the late 70s. This idea in the Boston offices, and so we reintroduced this through the company, and about right around the time I started as a corporation, it was like, okay, finally we had some meaning here. We could introduce it through a meaning and ground everything in kind of what we want to do with kids.
So you went back to the origin story.
Well, it kind of did, but like origins, like 1908. Yeah. You know, like so. But this was about kind of mid-origin. Yeah. But yeah, so we did harken back though to something that was a really powerful idea, and so. This was coinciding with the start of this rebuild of a business. So the next slide was really like, this is what we got from the global geo relationships. You guys know probably how it goes. This is what we got, and they were like, hey, make this mean something. And we were like, well, the good news was everyone has the shoe and everyone knows what the shoe is, but the consumers in China really didn't have a relationship with it that much. And so we made a choice to say, okay, look,
you mean they were buying the shoes?
They weren't buying. No one was buying the product.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just. It was. The business was just really bad. So, but we all love the shoe. Everyone here loves this shoe, probably, unless you work for an opposite brand. This is a classic. This is hanging in MoMA, for God's sake. It's one of the most iconic pieces of fashion ever made, right? Yeah. So we said, okay, let's really make this mean something to kids here. So we grounded the first chapter of the Converse narrative in China to this shoe, because I think it's really important to ground it into the strongest thing that you possibly have as your anchor point. And we spent 6 months to 8 months just talking about this shoe's quality of craftsmanship.
So to your point, Arnaud, is really it's a very singular way to start a conversation.
Yeah, right. So just ground it in the foundation of the business and the thing that you're most proud of over 100 years. But in the next slide, it was how do you do that in a cool way for youth? And so what the team had come up with was just a really simple idea around communicating through the lens of Danmu. Does everybody know what Danmu is?
What is Danmu?
It's a communication style and how kids watch TV in China. This pops over their screen.
Commenting as you watch.
All the comments come.
Yeah.
So
that's why you're quite old.
All of these Danmu, and all of these were. This is exactly how a kid watches and digests content in China. Like this is how they watch it all day long, and this is the style they use. So we just borrowed the style. And we had authenticators from fashion from all around the region just saying why this shoe is really important. And it's so basically the first chapter of this narrative for us of spark progress was like, hey, let's start with the shoe first and reintroduce it to the consumer and build our progress off of that. Make sense? So start with your strength and then authenticate it in a really powerful way, but just focus on that. The next thing we did was, oh wait, that's the video. Okay, so back off just before I start. Okay, the next thing we did was so chapter 2. That was chapter 1. We did about 6 to 8 months of storytelling just around this idea of crafts, different chapters, different product benefits, obsessing it, and it quickly became the most successful launch probably in the last 20 years of Converse. This became 60% of our business. and it was our highest priced product. So like Converse typically was known as a very cheap product, and it quickly, but at 600 kwai, very affordable for a kid in China, versus a pair of Nikes at 1,400. So it's almost like accessible luxury in some way. So pretty cool. And then what the next chapter was like, okay, now let's ground it in people, in authentic voices, to really amplify it outward and like to build even more authenticity. So this is my favorite piece that we've done over the course of the last couple of years, and I'll show it to you here.
Yeah, we have some music. She's a very cool girl.
Oh, is there audio? Good. Okay.
She's 19. She's 19. 4 years old.
Gender Yogusha means all the stories are true. And so without saying a word, we winked and said, this is what the Converse brand always has been, an enabler for creativity in a slightly irreverent way. But we did it in a way, and so we ran a whole campaign of many of these stories around like, hey, let's ground this in human emotion and storytelling, in the stories of people themselves. And it was super cool for me because we would have been mired in this idea of indie rock and like grunge metal and like CBGB and this stuff for like a decade, and no one was even looking at hip hop or what was actually happening with youth culture. And to actually pair this against like symphony or an orchestra was the furthest thing from what Converse had ever stood for kids.
But she make the bridge.
But this is where kids are going now. They're like a kid in China. Every kid studies violin, piano, cello, or like every kid is doing it. And so it really resonated in some fashion with most youth. So it was just a really cool. So we ran this narrative, this chapter of the narrative, for another 6 months or so with different stories, and then it brought us to this year. And so this year it was like, okay, chapter 3 is going to be about actually starting to really talk about progress. So, because you don't really want to start your narrative with like dropping the bomb at the beginning. You want to ensure that you're curating it over time. So I think we started to actually give a hint to the progress of youth and inspiring that. And so this is one of the pieces that we've done, kind of another unexpected piece, but this is my last slide, I think. So. And so this coincides with Converse's awkward return to basketball. We haven't been in basketball in a long time, even though we started as a basketball brand. So we're just coming back into it now. In China, it's the first time our brand has ever been associated with the sport of basketball. So
for real, the shoes are made for play, right?
Yeah, so these are actual.
Since the 70s, it hasn't been.
We haven't had performance shoes in 10 years. There's a really nice story behind this story. Again, we didn't say a word here. It's about this young man is from Xinjiang, and it is Abudu Shalamu. And he is the best young player in all of China. And he made the China national team, and they played in the FIBA World Championships just this last quarter. And he was starting the entire time and throughout all the training journey and so forth until the games actually started, and then they benched him. Inexplicably, he never played in the tournament, even though he was starting every game prior to. And so clearly, we had to have a point of view here afterwards. We had to say something, but we couldn't say anything because if we did, we'd probably get in big trouble, right? We'd find ourselves talking about the CBA, and we couldn't do that. But we wanted to pay tribute to him, and we wanted him to be able to express this idea of progress, that he's going to keep going, and of course the CBA season started a couple of weeks later, and we launched the night of the CBA season's first game. And it was just a kind of a thing from us, like a tribute from us to say, everyone, we believe in him. He didn't play 1 minute, but he's going to be a star someday. And we're going to be the catalyst, and we're going to help him spark that progress. And so now we're on the spark, like a little bit more of a progress chapter of the story. And so over the next 6 months, we'll be delivering a lot more of that. And so I think we'll continue to iterate, and we'll make sure. I think it's important to listen to consumers and how they're reacting to it and where they are in their journey as well with the brand. But I think chapter by chapter, we're having a lot of fun just trying to bring this brand story to life.
Yeah, amazing. So I think what I want to maybe next question is, do you think there's we are bombarded by story in so many forms these days. I mean, and I'm talking also about with the streaming phenomenon, Netflix, and it's like, I mean, the level of it's like every day is Christmas if you like stories, basically. And if you look at what the output is, just amazing. And it's like a monster. You need to keep feeding it. So, do you foresee any kind of a fatigue from people, and if yes, how would you address that? And I think it goes back to the idea of a simplicity, a truth, and to the story that we want to talk about. I mean, Arnaud, maybe you were hinting at that at the beginning when in the way you slap those creative people and say nobody want to hear that story, and it just focus on something that is maybe that is essential to the people you're going to talk to, not just, but it comes from you at the same time. So that's a panel discussion.
Well, it's complicated.
You started.
I think no, I think people cannot be don't. Yeah, it's really complicated. I think people will still need stories, imagination, reinventing themselves. It's a kind of very important need, but I think they will also see through the fake story much more easily,
right.
And then they will feel if there's really no connection with the people who started the story, if there's no connection with some value also. I think the stories the narrative is linked to value. So if it's just a gloss on top of something that is empty, people will know more and more. You talk about the streaming. I think the first time you start to have Netflix, you spend 3 months watching things all the time, and one day you're like, oh, I cannot. It's too much, and I'm sick, and it's like a very sweet cake. It's delicious, and then you eat too much, and you're like, I don't want to eat that for 3 months. So I think it's the same. Like, people will feel, don't feed me story that are fake, don't feed me story that are not connecting, and they will reject this kind of thing. But it doesn't mean they don't need narrative in their life. I think people that are building brand, that are making this narrative, they have to be very careful, because people will start rejecting everything that is really fake.
So how do you weed out because you're also a curator, basically. I mean, I think you can talk about that. What you were just saying, that selection process or that refinement.
You need to really,
and also you create your own brands, ONS, and
you need to go deeper. I think, for instance, I work with 150 brands, but I feel at some point it's my responsibility. For instance, I am listening to my customer. They are really, they care. They really, really care now about sustainability. They care. Yeah. They really, really care about, like where things are made, how it's affecting the planet. And then you have 9 million brands that come to me like, oh, we're green, we're sustainable, we're cool, and your customer will love me. And then you just need to do your homework. And then, for instance, sneaker brand that are not Converse, So there are two, like for instance, there's this brand called Veja,
Yes.
And
French, right?
I know the people, and they are like so obsessed with all step of the way sustainability conscious products, and they're like mega nerds about this, you know, and they will think about every single things, and then I feel okay if I want to tell the narrative about, you know, like a product that is maybe super capitalistic and people are doing it in a very different way. This is a brand, and then there's this other brand, also French, called Fago, like, and they're like, oh, we make sneakers, and if you buy the sneaker, we plant a tree, and then you go, and there's nothing behind, and then that's why you say, that's a narrative I don't want to tell. You know, that's not something I want to put in front of my crowd, and because they will know it's just nothing. You know, it's empty. So yeah, I think we need to, when we are making brand, working with brand, we need to do this work of kind of scraping and finding, oh, there's something behind or not. It's a responsibility.
Yeah, Mathieu, you wanted to
I was
add?
going to say the bullshit meter on kids these days is very, very sensitive.
Yeah. They know more than
they
us.
know more than us. Yeah, they'll know more about your brand than you do, and you'll find that out pretty quickly if you try to mess around with them. And so I think I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, without the authenticity and the authentic stamp and like being really real and true, they're just gonna call you super quick and they'll move right on.
So maybe I also wanted on a more personal note, maybe to wrap up the conversation before taking question. I'd like to know. I mean, I want to do this talk also about what makes us. You know, every day we wake up and as creative people or everybody, and just put some energy into, whatever we do. It's a lot of energy that we spend every day, and sometimes, I mean, it's been a challenging year, and just sometimes you just wonder why you do it. So what is, and I think the narrative, for me, I think the idea of a narrative is really a driving force in a way, because it's open-ended, so we know we can keep adding to it, and we can always try to, there is a starting point, like with a Rise Hotel or things like that, but we know the story is going to keep going, and to see that story being, when you see other people that, I mean, there's nothing more satisfying for us and when we create something, we put it there, and then people just welcome it and just go and use it or wear it. But on a personal level, is that something that inspire you to, or music that you put on in the morning, something that really drive you through what sometimes is, I mean, it can be a tough process. And you have and you all have a connection, also a personal, a personal connection to what you do in a way. I mean, Arnaud it runs in your family, I think. Your sister is involved. Mathieu, you play basketball before working with Nike, and Ben, you've been designing some of the hottest. I mean, you've been involved in very hot social destination design in London, the Groucho Club and things like that. And so you have a personal connection to music and things like that. So I just want to hear from you more from a personal level, in a sense, and before taking questions. Yeah.
I'll start. Two things really for me is one, being a dad of 3 kids, 13, 10, and 4, and something that one of my mentors had taught me about 6 years ago in early in my Nike journey, which was think like a child. And I really liked that. I never forgot that. And it was all about the why question, the why game. You know what I mean? Like, why? And then you answer, and it's like, why? And you get 5 whys in, and you get to the truth. And you get to, and applying that to what you're trying to do creatively is you get to the insight. And that insight guides you all the way home, really, usually. And so think like a child was the one thing for me, and the inspiration I can take from my kids every day, all the stuff they give us every day, in the inspiration they give us. The second thing for me is I'm not a creative. I don't get to be creative anymore because I'm a general manager, and so they're like, you don't have time to do that, and you're not allowed because you have to empower your team to do it. So it's kind of weird. But I think the thing for me now, the motivation is applying that to the team of about 250 people, and then taking that and saying, look, okay, all my creativity that I once had, now I can do the same exact thing, applying it to the people who are actually working on this project, working on this brand, right? And so that's the most rewarding thing for me nowadays, is not being able to make cool things and creative things. And like the Nana ad, the cello ad, that one didn't even make the cut from my team. They wouldn't let me. I had to make sure that they made that specially for me. They actually added wording on top of it and some narrative, and I was like, oh shit, man, like it was so perfect without anything to say. But they wanted to because they thought they needed to be a little bit more literal. But so yeah, it's kids, and now applying it, having the motivation to have to do it and apply all these things to the team every day.
And Arnaud, maybe you want to talk a little bit of Maison Cansier?
No, I talk about maybe the narrative. I mean, the problem with this, the narrative and the branding, and like 1 year ago, it felt, oh, that's the most important thing, and I was so consumed also by my shop, and I thought this is where what I'm doing is really amazing, and with what's happening in this year, you suddenly realize, you just have this big question mark, like, oh, is it really important? Is it not so superficial, this narrative, this brand, my store, because I know, I love my store, but I know you can live very happy life without buying anything. Nothing is essential, So and then I have, every Monday, I have meeting with my team, and they are very young, a lot of them, and they just come, and they were obviously thinking of something else, and sometimes crying and everything, and it was very tough to know, like, I question, what I was doing, and then I just realized that actually, even though they were very preoccupied and sad, they wanted to come to work because they wanted to have a space that
a safe
normally, like, work is a crazy thing and outside is fun, but it was the opposite, and then it was more normal inside, and I felt, oh, for my customer it's the same, maybe they need like a safe space when they can just unplug a little bit, and then they still have this need for something a bit superficial, but it's not. It's very essential, actually. So finally, I came to peace that I can still do my job, and it's and I could feel that all these stories and narrative, their sense of escape is actually super important. So that's why I think it's good we have this talk, because it's not something meaningless.
Okay, I feel better now, Ben, because I was asking myself the same question. So, yeah, it's great. Great experience. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about your? I mean, you are based in a quite amazing city. London is so interesting in terms of also in terms of the musical culture, and you're involved with that, and there's been so many talent. Very young talent coming up, and a lot of them I was mentioning in the plays you've done in Shoreditch, and just looking at the program is really amazing. So to be connected to that scene, I think it must be a source of inspiration also for you. And
well, I think it is, but I think music is an incredible inspiration anyway. I mean, in our studio we have a record player, not because it's trendy, but because I think it's one of those things. I mean, I've bridged both worlds of analog and digital completely in my education and in everything I've sort of done in life. And I think we sort of lost that deliberate art of making some choices about music, of putting on a record. And for me, it's about actually being able to do that and listen to something in its entirety. And that's an incredibly inspirational thing. So I think that's one side of music. But I think that's also led to a resurgence as well from the digital about this kind of increased interest in live music and in live music venues.
Yeah, it's just spectacular.
Experiential experience for it's always in inverted commas for millennials, but actually I think it's for everyone. Everyone likes an experience, and I think everyone engages with that, and I think that's where the most successful spaces for anything come from, where you're in an environment that you find stimulating and engaging, and especially in music, for sure.
This is something we have to do more in our hotels. We do, I think, live music. And I think Matthew, you were in Seoul last week. Yeah, staying at Rise.
Yep.
Yeah, with your team.
Amazing property, amazing, just a really wonderful experience,
Yeah.
and so true to your point. I think kudos to taking the leap to build something in a district that isn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
And it's like literally,
Yeah.
it's not really that close yet. It's still coming.
Yeah.
Which is why we're also exploring some space there, because we know that's where the hub of youth culture is. That's the beating heart of Seoul, with the university, right? The creative university right next door. So
the art university.
it's the perfect spot, and it's going to be the future of the city probably for youth culture. So
Yeah, I mean, I think and really, thanks to the vision and dedication and the vision of the owner, and just to see, and they really saw it as a beacon, for to attract, more people to this neighborhood. But also the music, and I know that the rooftop bars, so where they play was vinyl, and they actually have a wax thing. They can actually press vinyl there. Is just been, it was full, right, last week when you were there?
full.
Yeah.
With all the right people, right? Like if you're like we in the hotel industry, I'm going back to the hotel days, but like you always had this archetypal consumer of who you wanted to be in the bar.
Yes.
They never were there. They were never there. It was always someone else, and you were like, shit, But then you went upstairs to the rooftop bar of Rise, and it was like, oh, these guys have actually hit a home run, because everybody is who was supposed to be here is probably here. It was pretty cool.
Great.
Yeah. That's cool.
Okay. Arnaud, you want to talk about music? Because you're really involved in music, but no, you don't. Okay, we'll play some music later.
Narrative,
Yeah. Enough.
myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.